we all know that it's Palm Sunday. And for Christians, the beginning of the Holy Week, the celebration of the climax and the culmination of the ministry of Jesus. But actually, this is a sacred time of the year for virtually all major religions, and it has been so from the beginning of antiquity. Here in the Western world, we tend to view this period from the perspective of the life of Jesus as reported in the Bible. But the Bible is not actually history. The Bible is a book of mysticism, written primarily by Middle Easterners who, with the exception of Paul, lived and wrote sometime after the events that they described. And their stories are in the word of mouth, Oriental traditions, a mixture of fables and facts and symbols. But they're designed to convey spiritual ideas well beyond the words of themselves. They're stories in the Middle East. Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. It is the meaning of the story that counts. In Unity, as well as in New Thought movement, generally we view the Bible metaphysically or metaphorically as the story of every man and the evolution of consciousness, in which you and I are actually the main characters. And all of the characters are aspects of ourselves. It's sort of like Greek mythology. So today, I would like to concentrate on the events of Palm Sunday, their relationships to our lives, what it means, why is it important, and how does it relate to us? You remember the story, I'm sure. It all started right after Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Excuse me, my sinuses today are having a problem. Okay, so Lazarus from the dead in Bethany, which was only 2 miles from Jerusalem, and the Pharisees became afraid that Jesus' growing population, and he'd have to go because if the people no longer respected the authority of the Romans, Jesus had to go. Not to save mankind, though, from sins, but to preserve the status quo and save the Pharisees. It's a little bit of a different story than the one that we possibly grew up with. So Jesus played it cool, and he withdrew to the town of Ephraim and at the edge of the desert until 6 days before Passover. When he returned to Bethany, where Mary and Martha and Lazarus gave him a dinner on his behalf. So the crowds then were flocking to Jerusalem already because of the festival, but when they heard that Jesus was actually going to be there, they came rushing to him to greet him with branches of palms. And as he rode into town on this young donkeys, then the Pharisees were like, you see, there is nothing you can do. Look, the whole world is running after him. And upon entering the city, Jesus spoke these famous lines. Now the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. I tell you most solemnly, unless a grain of wheat falls on the ground and dies, it remains only a single grain. But if it raises up, it yields a rich harvest. So anyone who loves his life keeps it. Anyone who hates it, his life in this world will keep it for eternal time. So in this passage then, it follows the book of John, and there's little doubt that Jesus was talking about his own death. But there's also a deeper meaning, and he goes on to say, the light will be with you and only a little longer now. Walk while you have the light, or dark will overtake you. He who walks in the dark does not know where he's going. While you still have the light, believe in the light and you will become the sons, and I added, and daughters of light. So in this first passage then, he was talking about his own death. But in the second passage, he's speaking directly to us, not just to the people of Jerusalem, but to us. He was speaking from his own Christ consciousness to the Christ center within each one of us. So what was he saying? What was the message? What is the relevance to the way we live today? How might this affect what we do and say today, tomorrow, or even next week? But first, let's take a look at the places that were involved. So we have Bethany. The name literally means house of affliction and depression. Metaphysically, it signifies demonstration over these conditions, a healing of consciousness. Ephraim, literally, doubly fruitful, highly productive. But metaphysically, it signifies the attainment of understanding of truth principles and how to demonstrate these principles within our own lives. Jerusalem is a place of peace, metaphysically a symbol of the Christ consciousness. The consciousness of being, the unity of harmony, of being one with God, and throughout our oneness of God. Jerusalem, the place of peace. So we want to get out of Egypt and we want to move to Jerusalem, that place of peace. Then we have Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And they represent different aspects of our own consciousness. So think about this. Martha represents an extremely or directive consciousness of doing. It's a funny story there. When I first became a minister, I was assistant minister in my church. And most of you that know me well know that I love home and kitchen and cooking and serving. And my minister at the time would say, "You are a minister and I want you out of the kitchen. After service, you need to be with the people." So the Martha in me wanted to be in the kitchen and serve. And it was very difficult. And we had this big, beautiful kitchen in that church with 2 refrigerators and 2 stoves, and it was a marvelous place. But Aubrey, you have to get out of the kitchen. Stop being Martha. You are now Mary. I wouldn't go that high, however. So Mary represents then the directive, intuitive side of our nature, while Lazarus represents the unconscious awareness of our divinity. Think of this, Lazarus still sleeping. We're unconscious yet, we're still sleeping. So until called forth, so we're sleeping until we're called forth by the Christ consciousness. And the Pharisees are literalists, concerned with formalities, appearance, rigid order, and the status quo. They represent our own slavish devotion to race mind ideas, the thoughts and opinions of others. And of course, then we have Jesus, the central character in this story, represents God expressing as man, the I am that is in each one of us. So the Christ represents the divinity of man then at the highest level of expression. Let me say again, the Christ, or the Christ consciousness, that is what is within us. That represents the divinity of man at the highest level of expression. Jesus becoming Christ in eternity, living demonstration of our coming in our consciousness, helps us be aware of our own divinity. So just as our own individual situations in our lives reflect our own consciousness, every person in your life is there in response to your own consciousness also. Just as every circumstances and situation also represents every state of your mind. You know, thoughts are things. What you think is what you get. So the palms, by the way, traditionally represent martyrdom, but it is true that they represent victory. Interesting enough, palms are not native to Jerusalem. The city of palms is in Jericho. So when you have your Easter dinners or your Palm Sunday dinners today and someone says, where do palms come from? You know the answer. The palms, city of palms in Jericho. So let's not forget, though, the symbol of the donkey. Now, why would this be important, do you think? Why do people use donkeys rather than horses when moving from the high country?
Beast of burden.
Cool. Beast.
They put their feet careful.
You got it. Sure-footedness. That's what it's about. While the horse is majestic, a majestic symbol, what it is, the attribute of the donkey that makes it more fitting for a symbol of leadership, sure-footedness, Absolutely. Being able to move through and be sure about your leadership. A donkey doesn't prance and strut, but it knows what it's doing and where it's going. So I decided I'd rather be a donkey than a horse. Now, no comments from any of you. I realized what I said right after I said it. Okay. Okay. And I thought this was going to be a dull metaphysical talk. Okay, so Jesus knew that he was in full command. That's the bottom line. Jesus knew he was in full command. The circumstances that he attracted to himself were exactly what he wanted to have happen, to demonstrate once and for all of us, the power that each of us has to take command of our lives. We have the power. We are the power. Jesus knew what he was doing and where he was going. He was not led like a lamb to slaughter. He moved in and through the events of that week in full command of himself. He set the whole thing up, and so do we. Only we don't always recognize it. Every crisis in our lives is one we have brought to ourselves. Not necessarily the story and the details. I mean, few people consciously choose to be sick, poor, at war with themselves or their neighbors. You know, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I wonder how cruel I could be today or who I could stomp on and hurt. I don't think anybody does that. Just as I don't think any parents wake up in the morning and say, how can I ruin my kid's life today? But every time everything we do is a time of results of something going on in our consciousness. When I first got into this teaching, one of the things I hated more than anything else when people would say to me, what's in your consciousness? Because that's really annoying. But that's the truth. What is in your consciousness? What are you thinking? So what do you think Jesus actually meant then when he said, walk while you have light, or the dark will overtake you? Walk while you have light, or the dark will overtake you. He wasn't talking to the ignorant. He was talking to his disciples, his followers, those to whom he could soon say, great works that I do, even greater you shall do. He was talking to the people that were beginning to realize their own divinity and were ready to take responsibilities for his light. He was talking to people like you and me. If you weren't ready at least to accept the ideas of your own divinity intellectually, you wouldn't be here this morning. This is why we're here. We're here to understand and to learn maybe one more thing on the step to evolution, the rising of our consciousness. But our teaching is not just a fair weather teaching. It can be seductive. So why do I say that? The idea that there is a power for good in the universe, which is greater than we are, and we can use it, that's a very attractive concept. Thousands of people have come into this teaching, latched on into the concept and demonstrated in their lives. And then things happen. Even people who have demonstrated a very high consciousness, they do get sick, encounter financial reversals, lose loved ones, lose their own sense of direction and purpose. Many of these come to their senses from that they're brought from, and this will take it the rest of the way for them. They come to their senses and understand, I do have this power. I do have this ability. I am able to state my word. They know that whatever is happening is a result of their own consciousness, and that the mind which produced the problem, listen to this, the mind that produced the problem is the mind that will solve the problem. The mind that produced the problem is the mind that will solve the problem. And I think Jesus was talking to the people who see the light and they lose it. How many times have we been in this, beautiful summer of our life and everything is bright, and then all of a sudden it starts to dim, something happens, something's touching our souls, something's pushing us. We lose a job, we lose a family member, or we lose ourselves. How many times? Yet everything in our lives has to change at some point. You know, our clothes change, our cars change, our jobs change, our homes change, pets, friends, relationship. Everything is about change. And even our bodies change. We know that every 7 years, every cell in our body has changed and is renewed. Think about that. Think about that. Every cell in our bodies will die many times, but we still go on. So we're dealing with the presence of Spirit, which is always with us. What we think in our minds and we believe in our hearts, that is what manifests in our lives. And here's the whole, 220 of it. We can run from it. We can deny it. But we can't change it because it's the truth and it's the law. So there's only one way then to treat the problem, and that is to go in our mind and change our mind about our mind. And that's not so easy to change your mind about your mind. It's not, right? It's not that easy. Take a Course in Miracles. That'll tell you how hard it is to change your mind about your mind, because that doesn't mean anything anyhow. But that's a whole nother talk. So there is that within us that each knows exactly how to meet and transcends every problem that we attract ourselves. The answers are all within. If the kingdom of heaven is within, and thoughts are things, and we are co-creators with God, then we know how to change everything in our mind. So William Shakespeare said this in Measure for Measure: our doubts are traitors. Our doubts are traitors and make us lose the good we oft might win by failing to attempt. Let me say that again. Our doubts are traitors and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt. Jesus did not sneak into the city of Jerusalem. He came triumphantly, not boldly or flauntingly. He wasn't seeking to stir up the troops, but he came with confidence and he came with assurance. Yeah. But the triumph comes. Excuse me one moment. But his triumph was not over the chief priests. I know I need something to make these things go better. His triumph was not over the chief priest or the Pharisees or the Romans. His triumph was over his own doubts and fears. And in this time, he was indeed triumphant. The only thing holding us back from our highest good is our doubts and our fears. They can present seemingly insurmountable obstacles if we lose sight of who and what we are. I firmly believe that in some point in our lives, we find ourselves in situations and in circumstances where we have to risk everything. Every crisis has within it the seed of opportunity that calls for letting go or opening up or letting go of the lesser in order to experience the greater. Sometimes we have to let go of this little thing here, so that we can experience this, the greater. Letting go of the lesser in order to experience the greater. But the triumph comes, and this is the lesson of Palm Sunday I want to leave you with. The triumph comes in realizing we have precipitated the crisis for the primary purpose of allowing something within us to come into expression, whatever that may be. And something within us is called forth by the Christ consciousness. That's something that says, I'm not happy, I'm not sad, I am here, but something needs to move through me. Something right now, something is pushing, and it's pushing up and outward, and it finally hits our consciousness or hits our heart space and our intellect and our consciousness, and it says, move. Move. If we don't keep spiraling upward and forward into higher consciousness, we get stuck. And we all know about getting stuck, and we all know about the river. The river goes up, around, over, and through, but it doesn't stay stuck. And if we don't want to stay stuck, we have to take whatever that step is to move forward. You can choose the light, or you can choose darkness to overtake you. You can give in, you can back off, accept it as inevitable, or try to cope and seek a softer, easier way. Or you can let the inner light of divine wisdom show you the way through the problem to its solution. That is the way of triumph. If you call on God to show you the way with a sense of knowing that there is a way, it's not like, dear God, help me. It's, dear God, I know there's a way. I am opening to listen, to find the way. You don't beg God for something. You open your consciousness and say, I am open. I am open. I am willing to go over, around, up, or through, or break down walls. But I'm open. Show me the way. Higher self, guide me. Be with me now. Show me the way. So when you put that first foot forward to begin moving through the problem, every entrance that you make will be a triumphant entrance. Remember always this, that your life is your show. You're the author, the producer, the director, and you're the star. You're also the audience. And the only audience that you have to please is yourself. So if you want a good show, make every entrance a triumphant entrance. And turn the page, Aubree. And that was the end of the lesson.